and welcome to another episode of Modal Mental Health. My name is Mark Ali Bishop, and I want to thank you for riding with me on our journey to emotional wellness. Today's topic: confidentiality. What's the big secret? Okay, so in our previous episode, we discussed therapy and finding a therapist. And so in this one, we're going to talk about confidentiality, because that's one of the first things that you and your therapist should be talking about. And so one of the initial papers that you're going to sign in all the paperwork that you're going to get is a piece of paper called informed consent. And basically what informed consent is going to talk about are the positive and negatives, the risks and the rewards of getting therapy. And part of what's in informed consent is a discussion around confidentiality. And basically what confidentiality means is whatever is discussed in session will always stay in session. But there are limitations. In today's episode, I want to talk about those limitations. So first of all, with confidentiality, it's the therapist who holds the confidentiality. So you, as the client, you're free to discuss whatever you want with whomever you want about your discussions in therapy. It's the therapist that is now under obligation to hold confidentiality. Now, I want to go over what the risks are first, but a lot of people talk to me about, well, I don't necessarily need therapy. I talk to my friends, I talk to my family. I can process with everyone. I don't necessarily need a therapist. But what a therapist does is actually gives you someone you can talk to, but first of all is not judgmental and will not be biased. So hopefully that therapist will tell you what it is that you might be doing wrong, whereas maybe a friend or a family member may not. And so that's the importance, is you're getting an objective opinion. But also too, I'm going to talk about confidentiality with like siblings. I'll give you an example of a fraternal twin couple, so a boy and a girl. We'll just call them Andy and Brandy. So Andy and Brandy's parents divorced, and upon that divorce, we get weekly visitations with Dad. And so the weekend visitations with Dad. But Dad remarried, and so stepmom now is in the picture. And Brandy really, really warmed up to stepmom, and stepmom and Brandy really took a liking to each other. But Andy was struggling with the new situation, with a new mom in the picture. And there's some other things kind of going on. And so Andy would tell Brandy, his sister, how much he disliked his stepmom and a lot of things that he didn't like, or he felt that were, could be fixed or changed within that relationship. And so that's what Andy would do. He would just confide in his sister, thinking that the sister would not say anything. Well, one day, Andy and Brandy got into a heated argument, and Brandy became very, very upset and openly disclosed some of the comments that Andy was saying about stepmom, just to kind of get back or get even. So that caused even more tension in Andy and stepmom's relationship. So that is one of the struggles that a lot of people have when it comes to confidentiality. A lot of times they confide into friends or family members, but the thing of it is, no one's kind of held responsible to holding that confidentiality. But as a therapist, under the state, we have state laws that guard against confidentiality. So, but they are limits. And so today's video is just going to kind of discuss what those limits are. So one of the limits to confidentiality comes under release of information or an exchange of information. So basically what that is if anyone might have been seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist prior to the new therapist seeing this client, they're going to want to find out what kind of work was done. They're going to want to know the treatment plan, treatment goals, things that needs to be worked on to continue the work. And then also too, when it comes to like maybe psychiatrist and a therapist, there's two different type of relationships where a psychiatrist actually does a little bit of work around the mental illness, but also then doses out medication. And then maybe the client is seeing a therapist for the emotional support. So what the therapist would want to do is get in contact with the psychiatrist who's prescribed the medication, just to kind of make sure that the treatment and the medication are one and the same. So make sure that the therapist is kind of working, say maybe the medication's around ADHD symptoms, right? And so we want to make sure that the therapist is actually doing work around ADHD. So now the client is actually getting the medication and the emotional support around the diagnosis. So the another limitation is when a client in session reveals danger to self or danger to others. This is when the therapist has to actually go outside the office setting and maybe get additional emotional support, and it might be even legal support if there's homicidal ideation or homicidal thoughts, right? So we want to make sure that it's all goes around safety. And so your therapist will talk to you about these limitations further in depth, but these are just an overview. And another one is court order. So therapists are bounded by law to share information if ordered by a judge or a court. And we see a lot of this sometimes in divorce situations or custody issues, where maybe somebody in the family is actually receiving therapy service or something like that. And so the court or the judge may want the testimony of the therapist. Insurance. So if you're paying for therapy services through insurance, the insurance will want two pieces of information. They will not get access to any kind of therapy notes or any therapy session notes. But what they will want to know is what the diagnosis is and the treatment plan, in order for them to make sure that the compensation is actually needed. And then the treatment plan is just how long you as the client or in the therapist plan on seeing each other, right? And so to make sure that the therapist is reimbursed by insurance. I want to discuss a little bit about minor consent. So in therapy, every state's different, but with minor consent, there is an age limitation for minors to sign for themselves. And in the state of California, I don't know about other states, but in the state of California, it's 12 years. Now, there are some things that the child has to meet to make them eligible for minor consent. But basically, you might have a parent that is in denial that this child has depression, doesn't want to seek any kind of treatment. Well, a child of 12 years or older can actually sign for themselves. And the information disclosed to the parent is very limited because the child is now signed under minor consent. And if these situations kind of occur, feel free to talk to your therapist a little bit more in detail about what this looks like. And then the last one is when you might bump into your therapist out in the public. You should have a discussion. Your therapist will hopefully have a discussion of what that's going to look like. So say if you're out at the mall and you're seeing a therapist and you see your therapist in the mall. The agreement with you and your therapist might be the therapist will not approach you or engage with you at all, even though they may recognize you or see you and maybe just walk right by you, because you might be with friends or family that you necessarily don't want them to know that you're actually seeing a therapist, right? So that's kind of the confidentiality piece. And so what your therapist would want you to do, if you want to be acknowledged by your therapist or say hello, that's completely fine. That's your choice. And you would engage the therapist by saying hello. And then the therapist will then talk to you just like anyone else. So those are just a little bit about the limitations of confidentiality. In my sessions, my confidentiality little line that I say with my clients that I see is, anything that we talk about here will always stay here unless you tell me you're a danger to yourself, a danger to others, or this last one is abuse and neglect. So if you tell me that you know someone who has been or is currently being abused, and it could be in your home or it can be in someone else's home, then that's when I need to reach out and call CPS. Or if it's an adult, maybe there's an older adult in care and they're being abused or neglected, then I would call APS, or Adult Protective Services here in California. So abuse and neglect is the other time where we might have to break confidentiality and reach out to the state agency just to make sure that that abuse is looked into and making sure that everyone is safe. So the majority of times it's all around safety. So it's safety to oneself, it's safety to others, and also too we're looking at the abuse neglect. Now this is just a brief overview of the limits of confidentiality. I know a lot of clients that I have seen in the past and currently always want to review confidentiality before maybe they disclose something. And I'm completely fine with that. And sometimes I may not see a client for 2 to 3 weeks, and the very first conversation I'll have is just to kind of review confidentiality, just in case in the course of conversation something comes up where I might have to break confidentiality. Now, every therapist is different, but when I ever have to call CPS or I ever have to go outside my office and talk to anyone, I always have that discussion with my client. So if you do reach out to a therapist and you do start seeing a therapist, or you have seen a therapist, these are the conversations that I want to make sure that you guys have. So I know this was just a brief overview, but if you are seeing someone, make sure if you have any questions, any further questions, you talk to them, because your therapist should be open about having this discussion. So I'm hoping that this video was helpful. I'm hoping that maybe it kind of cleared up some misunderstandings. If you have any questions, you please feel free to email me at modalmentalhealth@gmail.com. And if you want, or you have any additional comments or questions, you can always leave me a feedback. Please share the video with anyone that you might think it would help or be helpful for them. And please always subscribe. And other than that, that's all I have for this video. I know it's rather short, but I'm hoping it was short and to the point. So as we ride together, all I want you to do is, at the end of these videos, is please be kind. Be kind to yourself, because you deserve it.